Hello, please let me see your ticket stubs for the Double-Edged Double Bill. Tonight's features showcase the Demon Knight of the Chopping Mall himself, Dick Miller.
Go ahead and laugh, you guys. But if I ever find a little bastards that did this, they're dead meat.
Each week, Adam Thomas and Thomas Mariani will come to the table to discuss the randomly selected yin and yang of a double feature. Then, both will have to pick a number between 1 and 10 in order to seal their fates for the next episode. One will have 2 good movies, the other 2 bad ones. Let the chaos begin. I'm Thomas Mariani, and I'm a grizzled janitor character actor who's going to be in one scene here. Yeah.
And I'm Adam Thomas.
Yes, that's all he is, simple, plainly Adam Thomas.
Yep.
Yes. And with us, you can hear him snickering in the background, is a returning guest. He was on our previous episode on Sam Raimi films. It is the host of the podcast By the Cemetery, Mr. Scott Crawford. Scott, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thomas, how are you doing?
I'm a grizzled character actor.
I'm Adam Thomas.
Good night, everybody. That's all we have. As we said at the end of last week, we wanted to do a tribute to the recently fallen, beloved character actor Dick Miller. Dick Miller, for those of you who don't know, was born in 1928, December 25th, 1928, and recently passed away on January 30th, 2019. He was a beloved sort of staple of B-movie cinema. He got his start with Roger Corman, who was a famous sort of schlocky film producer, still is to this day. I would recommend watching the documentary That Guy, Dick Miller, which I believe is still on Amazon as of when we're talking here. And that documentary talks about him being discovered by Roger Corman. He went out to LA to try and be a writer first, actually. And he couldn't get much work as a writer, so he ended up doing a lot of odd jobs all around, which is ironically what he would become famous for playing years later in a lot of movies. And Roger Corman literally discovered him while he was delivering a package with his buddy. Roger Corman was like, I like your look. I want to cast you in this Western I'm doing. And from there, he would appear in so many Roger Corman movies. And then people who would work with Corman later, filmmakers who would be future leading heads of the industry, like Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese or James Cameron, loved Dick Miller's visage and put him in their movies, and then that also inspired another generation to put him in several movies, usually as I mentioned, kind of working class, blue-collar stiffs. Probably the most famous role of his would arguably be Mr. Futterman in the Gremlins films, but he's been in so many other things, and he was probably the first character actor I ever recognized as, like, that guy. You know, the sort of person who you see is like, oh, it's that guy! And, because I remember when I was a kid, I watched Gremlins, and then I watched The Terminator later, and I'm like, hey, that's the old guy from Gremlins. And then I connected it from there, and I love character actors in general, but especially Dick Miller, always a welcome presence, and it was a real bummer when he died about a month ago. That was the first celebrity death in a little bit I've been really, really bummed by myself.
Yeah, same here.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, he's been in so many of my just all-time favorite movies. Still movies that I consider in my top. I mean, like you already said a couple of them, Gremlins 1 and 2, Terminator. I mean, the guy's just he's an icon.
Yeah, he absolutely is. Like you guys as well. Gremlins 1 and 2 were childhood movies of mine, and I still love them to this day. And yeah, I will always know him as Mr. Futterman. And just seeing him in all these other films as I've grown up, it's just amazing how many films he's actually been in.
Yeah, particularly he was Joe Dante's good luck charm. We talked about in our Joe Dante episode where he appeared in The Burbs and Looney Tunes Back in Action, but he was in most of his movies pretty much, because especially of all the people, Joe Dante was such a huge student of Corman and loved Dick Miller and was like a genuine friend of his. And I was so especially sad seeing like him post about it. You know, he was very close to Miller and his wife, Sheila. Once again, I recommend watching that documentary because the two of them have such a lovely relationship that's very much based off like they're quipping with each other, they're having fun, but you really felt that love. And especially I love the bit where she shows, oh, I did this portrait of Dick when I was younger, back in like the 70s, And the director says, so what inspired you to do, that painting? And Dick just leans his head and said, me! I inspired. Shit like that. Also, she was actually the stripper that Dustin Hoffman goes to see in The Graduate. That's her. Yeah. That's one big acting role. But, yeah, so Dick Miller obviously was in so many movies. And we're going to talk about two of them tonight. We picked at the end of our last episode. Ab and I came to the table with two movies, and we ended up randomly picking first we're going to discuss the bad feature, which we usually don't do. But there's a lot of reasons why we're going to probably talk about Chopping Mall from 1986 first. And then after that, we're going to lead into our good feature, which is Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Knight from 1995. So let's go ahead and get this started then with Chopping Mall.
They broke into the mall for the wildest all-night party of their lives. But you're never alone. In the Chopping Mall.
What's that?
Robot blood. Chopping Mall. Where shopping costs you an arm and a leg.
So, Chopping Mall came out, like I said, in 1986. Actually released limited in theaters on March 21st, 1986, under the title Killbots. And was directed and co-written by Jim Wynorski, and features not just Dick Miller, but a lot of other celebrated favorites of the horror genre. Like you got Kelly Maroney in the lead role, who you might recognize from Night of the Comet, and also briefly in Fast Times at Ridgemont High. She plays the Spirit Bunnies cheerleader. Like we call ourselves Spirit Bunnies now. She's great. But also Barbara Crampton, of course, and you got Paul Bartel and Mary Woronov reprising their roles from Eating Raoul, which is really weird in a cameo that I'm not sure why they're particularly there, but they're fun.
Yeah, I thought that was strange as well, actually.
Especially, they reference specific stuff from that movie, like the whole thing about, we should have one of those at the restaurant to dispose of people we don't like, is directly referencing, like, the plot of Eating Raoul. It's like, I don't know how this really connects. I don't know, maybe they're friends with the director or something. And then Garrett Graham also shows up, who you might recognize from Phantom of the Paradise and Used Cars, and Child's Play 2, among several other things. But basic plot synopsis of this movie is just, it's about a group of kids who are working at this mall, and they decide, hey, we're gonna have a party at the furniture store that most of the guys work at. And have open sex in the middle of the displays.
Right.
Right, but the mall has installed new security in the form of small, truncated killer robots that are going around. They say, no, they just stun people. But they end up doing a lot of shocking and grabbing and a lot of other stuff that ends up killing people as they go crazy. But no chopping.
I was just about to say that.
So 0 out of 10, this is a terrible movie, because it's false advertising. No chopping at all. Like, not even one limb, not one hand gets chopped off, anything. Terrible.
Yeah, and that poster art is just so misdirected, too. It's like, that looks like it's going to be a serial killer in the mall. Oh, no.
Right, yeah, it's this metal hand that's holding, like, a shopping bag. It's like, Chopping Mall. Oh, shit, it's a slasher movie. Nope. Killer robots.
It's like the fucking robots from Rocky IV went nuts.
That's not a bad one. I would also say it kind of looks like the prototype for Ed 209.
Kind of, with the visor, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and their fucking grabber arms that look like the elderly grabber things.
Just throw Johnny Five in there, too.
I was just going to say Johnny Five, actually.
And there's not a lot necessarily to say about Chopping Mall, because it's very lean, it gets very much to the point. It's 76 minutes long with credits.
Right.
So there's not necessarily a lot on the bone there. But I think the reason I mainly wanted to discuss this one first is because this is the prototypical Dick Miller role. Dick Miller would, in most cases, appear in one scene as some sort of blue-collar worker. In this case, he plays a janitor named Walter Paisley, which is a recurring joke because that's his character from A Bucket of Blood, the Roger Corman film that was sort of his breakout and was almost the choice that we did for a good film. And it's also interesting because this was technically a Corman-adjacent project in that it was produced by Roger Corman's wife, Julie Corman.
Yeah, and you can see a lot of nods to Corman's work with, like, the posters inside the restaurant, like Galaxy of Terror.
Oh yeah, the posters that are put on there with like tack, as opposed to
Yeah.
like being framed in that restaurant.
Right. A shitty restaurant.
Run by my favorite character of the whole movie, the stereotypical Italian guy, just like, yeah, girls, what are you doing? Do what's hard to go.
Smoking while he's cooking.
Yep. When that, by the way, that cook is played by Mel Wells, who was Mr. Mushnick in the original Little Shop of Horrors with Dick Miller.
Oh, no,
Oh, no shit.
Yes. But yeah, Dick Miller in here, like I said, plays Walter Paisley. He's disgruntled blue-collar worker who ends up getting killed very quickly by this robot after he sasses him, which fits pretty well for Dick Miller's usual type. But yeah, how about Scott, our guest? What were your first impressions of Chopping Mall?
Oh, let's see. This is probably like my, I want to say like 6th or 7th time watching this movie. I adore it. It's completely just bad movie just in general, but I have so much fun with it every time. But yeah, I think this is just kind of one of those just nostalgic 80s horror films where, yeah, there really isn't shit to the film except for just like a body count, and synth score, and a lot of unlikable characters like what was his name? John Terlesky. I forget the character he played. He was the bubblegum chewing kind of douchey guy.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah. He has the most punchable fucking face. I actually watched a film recently with him in it. It was him playing the main role of a film called Deathstalker 2.
Also made by Jim Warnarski. It's like his delivery, especially on the line about like, "Did you get the beer, Mike?" It's like, dude, come on.
Yeah.
He's very he's one sort of ski suit away from being a villain like Hot Dog the movie, essentially.
Oh, that is a perfect summation.
Or one of the, whatever they are, and the alphas in Revenge of the Nerds.
Oh, that's true. He is like a Leatherman jacket away from just saying nerds.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, definitely. Oddly, the heroes of those movies now in retrospect. Anyway,
Yeah, right.
anyway, but I mean, I kind of agree. I thought I had seen this movie before, but I realized I'd definitely seen clips of this movie before. I hadn't really seen it in full. And, despite being our bad pick, and despite, like I mentioned, being very lean, at the same time, it doesn't waste a lot of time. It knows exactly what it wants to be. It gets in, it gets out, and it's fun for what it is, honestly.
It's super fun.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of that, though, has to do with somebody like a Kelly Maroney and Barbara Crampton. I do agree that all the guys are very disposable, whatever, who occasionally just deliver fun lines, like, I do love, "Let's send these fuckers a Rambo-gram." Like, okay, calm down, man.
My favorite is the guy who was in, I think he's in Friday the 13th Part 2, maybe 3.
Yes. Yep.
The one who gets hung upside down and gets his neck cut with the wrong side of a machete.
Right.
But, when he's shooting at the thing and he hops on that little fucking, like, golf cart and drives super slow towards it, shooting at it.
Yeah.
Like, what are you doing, man?
And it gets electrocuted terribly. Well, admittingly, with the great 80s animated lightning effects, I always love seeing. Which also is how Dick Miller dies with the lightning effects. Great.
Yeah.
Right.
so great. But no, yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. I think it's a lot to do, though, with someone like Barbara Crampton, especially Kelly Maroney, I think really holds this movie together. Because she's not the typical person who would be sort of like the final girl of these movies. You figure like a Barbara Crampton would end up being that. But she dies in a spectacular fashion by getting caught on fire and turning into a male stuntman in the fire suit.
Right. Yeah, and if you notice too, like where her hair is supposed to be, it ends up being like a canvas bag.
Yep. Pretty much. Yeah. And also did not ever listen in school about stop, drop, and roll. Clearly. She just kind of like flops around like, eh.
She barely even flops. She kind of just lays on her stomach, dude.
That's true. She got like very slowly crawls around, for sure.
What's her name getting her head blown off was pretty cool.
Yes, that's the best death of the movie. We're referring to Susie Slater getting her head exploded. That's like the big highlight death of the whole movie. Because most of the other deaths are, like I mentioned, it's like they sort of like pinch the necks of these people or electrocute them or shoot them with lasers, shit like that. But yeah, that's the sort of show-stopping number of all the kills in the movie, and it's so spectacular. So spectacular, they show it twice at the end of the credits. That's her title card. bow.
Oh, yep.
Which is pretty dope too. But Adam, you picked this one, and mainly you were tasked with doing the bad movie necessarily, but you said something pretty accurate that you picked this one mainly because it's one of the few where Dick Miller has like a name and has more than 5 seconds of screen time. He has like at least 2 minutes here.
Right. Yeah. Right. I mean, first of all, picking bad Dick Miller movies. I mean, throw a dart at a dartboard. It's in a wall, you're gonna hit one. Because I mean, he was just in everything. I love the guy, but he was in a bunch of bad movies. But he's always, garbage truck driver or security guard 1 or dishwasher. Or to find one that he's actually got a first, let alone a last name, is really difficult to do. Especially in one that you would consider bad, because of the ones where he typically does have a full credit name, or the ones you remember him for, and like Murray Futterman. But yeah, this was super, super hard to pick for, and I had seen this before I picked it. I mean, let's just call it what it is, guys. It's a fun movie, but it's not a good movie.
Oh no,
it's cheesier than hell. It's like I said, like Thomas said, the out in the open like bang session. I never understood that. Like, dude, nah, just you can't go on like out in the mall or another store or home.
Yeah, especially when, like, you're with your friends and they're all kind of either having sex or especially the two who are watching the movie, Cal Maroney and the nerdier guy.
Yeah, or just like chilling on the couch.
You can't go into like the Radio Shack or something like that.
I mean,
all I gotta say, guys, is don't knock it until you try it. I mean, it's fun. Oh, I said that out loud, didn't I?
That's awful. That's awful.
And especially with another one of my favorite stupid lines, where I believe Mike is going down on Susie, and she says, "Mike, I don't allow that." Like, yeah, a dude wrote this, didn't he?
Oh, definitely, yeah,
for sure. But no, yeah, but at the same time, it doesn't waste a lot of time either with this, and it has a small budget, but it knows exactly how to use it. I do love that they shot in the same mall as Commando, which I immediately recognized because of the elevators and the streamers.
Yep, me too. Yep.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
And they were shooting around the same time, actually, but obviously they were shooting at nights versus Commando could do pretty much whatever the fuck it wanted at that point.
If those two movies bled together, they'd have no problems. Those robots wouldn't stand a chance.
Oh, fuck yeah. After Arnold Schwarzenegger was with those kids.
John Matrix going after the robots, they're done. Stick out. Let off some steam, robot.
I want to see this movie.
Yeah, hell yeah. We should write it. We could make $1 million.
Especially if you use just the same exact robots and don't update the special effects technology at all.
At all.
And and Kelly Maroney gets her own Arnold Schwarzenegger moment at the end where she repeats the "Have a nice day" bit.
Which I don't understand. I don't know that paint works like that. I don't think if you pour paint on the ground and then light it on fire, it creates a bomb.
No, it's all super lead line paint from China.
But even so like Superman couldn't see through it, but I still don't know that it would cause a massive explosion.
I'm not exactly sure.
She did throw like thinner down. It looked like a clear gas substance, but I mean not enough to make an explosion.
No.
Maybe make a fire.
You're right, a good fire. But hey, again, I'm arguing semantics in a movie where robots shoot laser beams out of their eyes.
Right,
so,
exactly.
Or yeah, especially they shoot laser beams out of their eyes, and when you have close-ups, you can clearly see where like the plastic is cracked on their eyes.
Oh, I know.
They clearly just like, oh man, we only have 3 of these things, and we're not gonna really have the budget to like afford more. I love the fact that these robots are so impractical, but they're still able to do things like the one that goes up the escalator, which obviously is a shot of like clearly like some crew member with the thing on top of him, so that you can't have the fucking wheels that wouldn't fit up those fucking escalators.
Yeah, I was trying to picture how that actually worked with like the tank tread going up an escalator. No, there's just no way.
No, there would not. Definitely. But they're still fun, and they'd still definitely like my favorite cheap effect of anything though has to be the moment where like Kelly Maroney's inside of the pet store and she's underneath, and there are actual like tarantulas and spiders at one point. They're like crawling around her. You're like, oh my god, wow, they actually got like these real fucking things to crawl over Kelly Maroney. And then when she gets up, there's clearly rubber spiders.
Yep.
That don't look anything Like that fucking the tarantulas. Great.
And they just kind of roll off of her.
Exactly, yes.
And there's someone clearly got something tied to the snake and like pulling it.
Yes.
That snake is moving so unnaturally. It's not even funny. Like, they're clearly just pulling it. Like, come on, move. And the thing is, too, so they could have just done that from the beginning. Just hid.
Yeah, because like if they would have
just
just stayed in their building, like stayed in each one of their like stores, they would have been fine.
Yep, just hid till the morning and could have got out. But, I guess when you got three, mind you, robots that are only on the top levels, you got to run around like crazy to try to get away from them. So I get it.
Don't move fast either.
Yeah,
No.
they go at most like 2 miles an hour.
That one guy could have got on that go-kart and just drove away.
Right?
They're very slowly getting away.
Right. Confusion, error.
No, but yeah, but at the same time, like I keep mentioning, it doesn't waste time. The only times where it's really slow is there's just this weird moment where they have to talk about, oh man, I realized if we survive this, we're going to be indebted to this mall for so long. It's like, I don't know, you could like sue them for these robots going this crazy, I guess.
Yeah. I'll say that's life endangerment right there, and
Yeah.
you did already lose a couple friends.
It's like, but no, we snuck into the store after hours. Like, yeah, but you didn't put these things in here that killed people when they're not supposed to kill people anyway.
Right.
So I think you're fine. I don't think you owe this mall anything. You could just sue this fucking mall and be fine.
For life.
Yeah, for life. You'd be set,
Yeah.
pretty much, yeah.
You could own them all, like every kid's dream.
Right.
And, and now, if you're a kid now, you could probably own them all. There won't be
That's
anything in
true.
it, but you could probably own it.
Yeah, there's several around me that give off a real, like, kidnappy vibe as soon as you walk in them.
That give off real, oh man, this has been, like, abandoned for years, but not really, technically, because a couple stores are still open.
Yeah, they're still an airbrushing stand in, like, a Far East Trader. Where you're like, what the fuck is going on?
Like, nowadays, you have to wait until the mall closes. Like, yeah, you can shoot now. But nobody's here.
Right, okay. Yeah, there's nobody here.
Hell, there's a mall down in the Flint area near where I live called the Dort Mall, and it is just like abandoned. There's I think 2 stores and a restaurant with 20 empty spaces.
I mean, I have one right now where it's like there was a Sears and that closed, and several stores are closed in between. Like, on one side is a couple open stores, and across several feet is like a movie theater. And that's it.
Oh, wow.
That's all there is. It's almost as if now we're running out of steam about talking about shopping mall, I guess. So,
The other thing about malls, what they didn't understand is the desire of the consumer in the late 80s is not...
very true. But I guess we'll go into final thoughts then. Scott, our guest, go ahead and start with final thoughts on shopping mall.
All right, so yeah, like we've been saying, this is a fun movie. It is I would consider this a bad movie, but 80s bad movie compared to nowadays bad movie, it has a special charm to it. And with this one, with the special effects, the cheesy robots, I mean, we didn't talk enough about her, but Barbara Crampton, if any movie she's in, I am a huge fan of. And the synth score is awesome, like the little nods to Corman's other pictures, just like the little things you can see. The characters are fun. This is like something I would recommend for anybody that's just a horror fan that loves the 80s horror films.
Adam.
You made a good point, bad movie in the 80s compared to bad movie now. There really is no comparison because you can tell that they were trying in earnest to make a fun, scary movie here, where nowadays it's all about just hopefully making a buck, or they don't appreciate what they have. They made the most out of the budget that they had. They made the most out of their cast, everything. It's a fun movie. It's just super fun. Like I said, I agree. I could sit there with a couple buddies and have a couple drinks or whatever the hell kids are doing now. What is it, Molly? You kids are doing the Molly? And watch this movie and have a good time. I could see.
I want to see you on Molly, Adam. That sounds like a good time.
I don't even know what it is. Like, I legit don't even know.
Crystal meth? It's like
Yes.
that, but more readily available.
Yeah.
That's pretty much what it is.
So I am on Molly right now. Oh, okay.
You're on the very cheap version of Molly. But I mean, yeah, I agree with what you guys are saying pretty much. There's not a lot to say, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad movie overall. It's one of the better of the bad movies we definitely covered on the show. Because it's definitely, like you guys mentioned, it's very earnest. It has a lot of charm in that way. I think, like I was kind of mentioning earlier, Kelly Maroney, I think, is especially the big sort of savior of the movie, where she's not the typical final girl, but in a way that's kind of endearing. You get the sense that her and Barbara Crampton are very good friends, and then it kind of, it does definitely suck when Barbara Crampton dies, and you feel for Kelly, and she is the backbone that makes the movie work as well as it does. But there's also little bits of flair with, like, the various character actors that show up. I really like, we didn't mention much about Garrett Graham, but he comes in as like the secondary scientist slash security guard, who's just like, oh, I wish this guy cleaned up after he gets killed. And he looks around and then eats the guy's donut, like what remains of the donut.
And I love Garrett Graham. He's like another one of those character actors that's just fun when you see him in a movie.
Always, yes, for sure. And it's, like I mentioned, it's fun for what it is. It's small, and like I said, it does not waste time. It knows exactly what it wants to do, goes in, out, doesn't waste much of your time while doing it. So, it's on Amazon Prime right now. You could find a worse way to waste an hour and change. Because, like, literally,
for sure.
Without the credits, I think it's like 65 minutes. So, you're fine. They really want to stretch it out as much as possible, for sure. But now let's get into our good feature, which will have more to say, I would definitely say, with Tales from the Crypt presents Demon Night.
Oh, hello, kiddies. Your pal, the Cryptkeeper, has gone Hollywood in a big way. Frights! Camera! Action! It's about a chase through the ages, a race against time, and the final battle between man and demon.
So, Demon Night, which was released January 13th, 1995, features Dick Miller and a cast full of, once again, great character actors, most of them. And this was the first of what was supposed to be a big franchise of movies that kind of spun off of the Tales from the Crypt TV show, which is based on the EC Comics line, obviously, and that was a show that lasted from like 89 to 97 on HBO, the one with the Cryptkeeper coming in, introducing anthology stories, and this was the first of what ended up being technically 3 of them, because there was this one, and then in 1996 there was Bordello of Blood, and then in 2001 there was one called Ritual, which initially went through so much limbo about, like, it was kind of a Tales from the Crypt movie, then it wasn't, and then when it was released on DVD, they added in the Cryptkeeper in sort of bookending segments, which I've only seen the bookending segments of that movie, and it involves the Cryptkeeper in dreads doing a Rastafarian accent, and it's not good. And even then, Bordello of Blood also not that great, I would say.
No.
Arguably
Bordello of Blood is horrible.
No, yeah. Because who thought, hey, Dennis Miller as our lead, great idea.
Yeah. Let's give Corey Feldman a big role and just let him go crazy in it. And that'll work.
Yeah. And let's give Sylvester Stallone's model girlfriend who had never been in a movie before.
Give her the main villain.
Yeah, give her the main villain role. Not the best. It's a very bad movie. It's interesting, especially sort of the genesis of that sort of Tales from the Crypt movie franchise, especially considering Demon Night was not originally planned as this. It was a spec script that had been written by Mark Bishop, Ethan Reef, and Cyrus Forrest that had been going around Hollywood. It was going to be made at several different points by people like Tom Holland. That was going to be his follow-up, actually, to Child's Play. Then Mary Lambert was going to do it, and then Charles Band was going to do it. But all those productions fell through until Joel Silver saw this script and decided to make it as a Tales from the Crypt movie. And I'll say this obviously has the Cryptkeeper in bookending segments where he's like making a movie and he's sort of framed as the director. And those segments are fun, but also don't fit this movie at all.
No, they really don't.
Not really, yeah.
And Ernest Dickerson, who is the actual director of this movie, I saw an interview where he talked about the whole point that you know, these stories for Tales from the Crypt were always sort of like morality plays and sort of dealt with assholes who get their comeuppance by the end of the story. And that's not this movie really at all. It's sort of more of like an action horror thing. It's kind of like, imagine crossing Evil Dead with like Highlander.
Yeah, that's a pretty apt description, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, I wish it wasn't necessarily attached to Tales from the Crypt, if nothing else, so it could be successful enough to where we would get sort of more of this universe, because this was my pick, and I picked it because I fucking love Demon Knight. I think Demon Knight is the supremely underrated 90s horror movie that I would have loved to have seen like more sequels of, just because the mythology they set up, basically, for those who don't know, is William Sadler plays this guy who at the beginning is being chased around by this guy named the Collector, played by Billy Zane. William Sadler, as Frank, has this sort of key jewel kind of amulet thing that stores blood inside of it, and that blood initially was there at the fucking crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So it has a bit of Jesus' blood in it, but also all the different blood of these various demon knights who have been basically going around trying to protect the world from demons trying to come in. And the blood has supernatural abilities and all this other stuff. But when we see them, obviously having this car chase, we don't quite know that yet. And Frank ends up holding up inside of a hotel while the Collector is being kind of interrogated by some cops after this big car crash that happens during the chase. And it ends up being sort of like a little siege movie that happens where the Collector arrives at the hotel where Frank and all these colorful characters are, which include people like Dick Miller, of course, but also CCH Pounder, and Jada Pinkett Smith, very young in her career, and Thomas Hayden Church and Charles Fleischer, a lot of great actors that pop up in here. And they basically have to hold up against these demons that are trying to come into the hotel and get that key so they can destroy the blood that can actually seal them up, sort of create force fields that prevent the demons from coming in. And that mythology is so cool, and especially how it sort of ends up becoming a story of succession, where Frank kind of has Jada Pinkett take on the mantle of the Demon Knight by the end of it. I wish we got on to see more of this, because I love this universe, I love this concept, and I love how it's another example of where it isn't a huge budgeted movie. It cost $12 million, made about $21 million, so it was a pretty moderate success. But I would have loved to have seen more of just, like, the succession and continuing on with, like, expanding this a bit more, seeing more about these demons, and especially seeing more people like a Billy Zane come in here and just steal the show for so much of it. I would say it's his best performance.
I don't think it's arguable at all. I mean, he just shreds the screen every second. From when I very first saw this movie, because I saw it when it came out, and I still quote one of his lines, "Bunch of hold down, low down motherfuckers."
Yes, great.
I laugh every time.
It's the best. He's so good in this movie, man. This movie alone is why I'm like, give Billy Zane a break. He doesn't know what he's doing most of the time. Like every Temptation Island movie or whatever the hell he's in. I'm like, oh, it's okay.
Or like fucking Scorpion 4, whatever direct-to-video sequel he shoots up in.
Oh my God.
I watched that. Oh yeah, I watched those. I don't know why I did, but I did. But yeah, no, he's great, and I've always liked William Sadler. I still love William Sadler. So I mean, this movie I think it's a perfect mix. It's funny. The makeup effects are fantastic in this. The practical effects. I
forgot how good these practical effects are.
Mm-hmm. And the cast is just incredible. I'm with you, Thomas. I love this movie. I think people know about this movie, but I don't think it's nearly appreciated as much as it should be. Because I agree with you. People are like, oh, the Tales from the Crypt movie. Well, it's more than that.
Yeah, I think it just kind of gets sidelined as sort of like, oh, it was a movie that couldn't really stand on its own, so it had to be a Tales from the Crypt thing. It's like, I really don't think that. I think, to be fair, without the Tales from the Crypt moniker, we wouldn't have this movie, given all the production attempts that were done on it. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, I think it exceeds that because it has so much more of a wider scope. The biggest problem I have with sort of those opening bits is not just the tonal stuff, but then we get the traditional Tales from the Crypt sort of very basic opening titles, and that feels completely incongruous with that awesome car chase that's going on at the beginning of this movie. Mm-hmm. That doesn't feel at all like a TV production whatsoever.
Yeah, because that car chase and the explosion that ensues is just incredible, and yeah, definitely like above anything TV budget wise they could ever afford, I think.
And that's not downplaying Tales from the Crypt, obviously, which we're all fans of the show, I assume.
I love Tales from the Crypt.
Yeah.
But I think it's in stark contrast to, like, 5 minutes prior, you had this joke with, like, John Larroquette being a serial killer in, like, the fourth wall breaking. It does feel kind of weird. But still, anyway. Like, Scott, what about your thoughts on Demon Knight?
Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. This is just a really fun, awesome horror film, and I would say it's probably in my top 5 horror films of the 90s, for sure. I mean, it's not saying much because there was a lot of crap in the 90s, but, you know, this is one of the gems that stands out, and Billy Zane is just incredible in this role. Like, I still am baffled that it's actually him playing this demon. He's, like, so charismatic and yet so dangerous at the same time. He, like, plays a perfect villain. And Jada Pinkett Smith is, wasn't this, like, her first appearance?
No, she had been in a few other things. Like, Menace to Society was, like, her big breakout role. She showed up here.
Yeah, she's really good in this as well. William Sadler, almost everything I've seen him in, he's incredible. Thomas Hayden Church played a perfect fucking dickhead, like he usually does.
Evening, hotel people.
Yeah.
Oh, and yeah, like the demons themselves just look really freaking cool. And I especially like the little kid when he gets turned into a demon. That thing looks disturbing as shit.
That's so gnarly, where just like his mouth is like open like a snake, so it's almost like his entire neckline down.
But yeah, this is just a blast from beginning to end. It has kind of a feel of like Tales from the Crypt when you're watching it, but it like you said, the story isn't a story of morality at all, and it, you know, obviously feels bigger budget because it is, but I don't know, there was something about it, maybe it's just kind of like that darker, almost gothic feeling to it that just kind of fit the Tales from the Crypt episodes that I watch.
Well, I mean, yeah, and there's also some humor obviously tied into there. I think Dick Miller especially has a lot of sort of the humor that would come across as Uncle Willie. He definitely comes off as a traditional kind of blue-collar dude that you would expect Dick Miller to be. But I think it actually gives him a lot more range, because the big thing with him being in this movie was Ernest Dickerson was a huge fan of Dick Miller from, like, growing up on Roger Corman movies. This is a great example of sort of that post, sort of, like, second-generation example. Ernest Dickerson growing up on not just Roger Corman movies, but also, like, the various, like, Joe Dante and James Cameron, all those other people who would put him in as a second wave. And this is like kind of the start of that third wave where people would be like, oh my god, it's Dick Miller from like Gremlins and all this other stuff I grew up loving. I'm going to put him in this movie. And actually, Ernest Dickerson gave him a lot more room to kind of like, well, you know, you can play a bit more with Uncle Willie. He's a bit more of like a, you know, smaller character in the script, and they allowed him to kind of expand upon it. And I think it has so much more range for him as an actor, where especially he's able to do like really funny things, like the bit where you sort of get the fantasy of what Billy Zane's giving him, and with the little bar sequence where he's just playing before, like, oh my god, all these ladies, they're all around at the bar. So
that fantasy scene was great.
Yeah, especially has another great Billy Zane thing where it's like, hey, Uncle Willie, try this on for size. It'll just fuck you up real bad. Another great Billy Zane bit. But also, it's probably the only time I can ever think of where Dick Miller gets to be genuinely intimidating when he gets possessed.
He's terrifying.
And it plays a lot on sort of the nice, charismatic, sort of older uncle character that he plays in the movie, and then having that go across, especially the way Jada Pinkett's reacting about just like, don't let me do this. Don't make me do this to you, Uncle Willie. Just like, oh fuck, I really feel genuinely emotional about this.
Like, I'd never been terrified by Dick Miller before, but yeah, he put the fear in me a little bit.
Yeah, with those green eyes and the giant chompers, it works perfectly for him. But obviously, he's one of just a series of great character actors who we've mentioned in here. I would say, personally, my favorite of the other cast members is CCH Pounder as the lady who owns the hotel. Because obviously CCH Pounder you would know from a lot of TV work, especially, where she would show up as sort of like an authority figure who's like no-nonsense bullshitter, and especially like the 90s and 2000s. What I like here is she's kind of playing against type in that she's still an authority figure, but she clearly has her life in fucking shambles, and she's just like smoking all the time, and she's a bit overweight, which was mainly done so they could have the arm prosthetic and hide her other arm a lot better once she gets her arm cut off. And she just owns, though, that part, where especially the bit where she raises up her stub and Billy Zane's like, I'll take that as a yes. It's like, no, that's me giving you the finger, asshole. Great.
Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, I have a very a problem with CCH Pounder now because anytime I hear her name or her voice, I for some reason, man, I can't help but think of Dennis Reynolds doing the impression of her, and It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. It was so perfect. But no, she's really good in this too. She's actually probably one of the best in it as far as just straight giving it. Other than Billy Zane, I mean, she's going for it. When she gets her arm ripped off, when she's drinking the vodka or just down in the liquor, constantly got that nasty like cigar bit in her mouth. Like it's so disgusting. But
and she makes what could have been the worst line of the movie perfect with the whole like "get that pussy off the table." I meant the cat. She delivers it perfectly.
Exactly. Another good bit in this movie is when Billy Zane's dancing with Jada Pinkett and then the fire comes out of his crotch.
Oh my God.
Woo, down boy. Like, come on.
Honestly, like, the thing is, with all the magical moments that happen with Billy Zane in this movie, and it might have to do with a recent trailer that came out, I just realized, you know what? He's pretty much playing the evil version of, like, the genie from Aladdin. So Will Smith shouldn't even be bothered.
Holy shit.
Yeah. I mean, he 100% is, yeah. No, he definitely is. Or he's basically the djinn from Wishmaster.
Well,
That's what I was just about to say.
I mean, he's very much playing, generally, like, a devil, as it were. Who's just trying to tempt people all the time.
Really hamming it up.
Oh, but doing it so well, especially with, like, that, you mentioned the tango bit, or another bit I love is the whole scene with Thomas Hayden Church actually handing over the key is just perfectly orchestrated. One, he comes up with the suitcase and his demon buddies are like right ahead and he's like, "Oh, excuse me, fellas, I gotta get up." He's like shimmying around him. And
Thomas Hayden Church, you don't seem like such a bad fella. Or you don't seem like such a bad fella yourself.
and how the sponge comes out of his mouth and he hands it over to him.
Oh, that was hilarious.
And then Thomas Hayden Church wipes it up, goes down the stairs. He's like, "Oh, by the way, I lied." And then Thomas Hayden Church, I forgot how fucked up he gets when that happens. He is like mauled to
destroyed. Death. Yeah, no, he gets it maybe the worst.
In stark contrast to Chopping Mall, all the deaths of this movie are brutal in the best way. Like Charles Fleischer gets it really bad in the movie too, where he just gets his like fucking head thrown around. Obviously, the big starting off point for all that is Billy Zane punching through that dude's head.
Yes. Yeah, and then he's kind of using the head as a extra fist beating up on William Sadler.
Yeah. It's so good. And I love also, that has another great CCH Pounder bit, where he immediately punches through that dude's head, and CCH Pounder, like, spits up whatever she's eating, like, oh, God!
Yeah.
Great reaction shot as well. We're mentioning, like, this all takes place inside the one hotel, and it feels almost like, along with, I sort of mentioned, like, Highlander and Evil Dead, it kind of has, like, a Western siege movie feel to it too.
Oh, 100%, yeah.
Oh yeah, definitely.
It looks like some seedy, old bordello in, Death Valley or something, where the evil gangs laying siege to all the innocent people inside. Yeah, totally. I mean, that's what I was trying to get at earlier. I mean, they just mix so many different genres in this movie, and it just all works. I mean, all of it works. There's not one time where I think they go maybe a little too far with the jokes or a little bit could have amped up the horror a little more. I mean, it's all there and it all works.
Because they knew, to be fair, that the movie was going to be introduced and exited off by John Cassier doing terrible puns. So they're like, okay, we can't go too far. Because we'll save all of that for the Cryptkeeper doing his shit, especially the lights, camera, action.
By the way, I've met that guy in real life. That's all he does.
I would figure.
Is laugh and do puns.
Yeah, would you want him to do anything else, though, if you met him?
No.
That's true. Yeah, I don't want him to be like, "Hey, how you doing? I'm John Cassera. Have you accepted the Lord as your savior?"
Could you do that, but as the Cryptkeeper? It's like, "Have you accepted God as your Lord and Savior?"
What do you know about railroad bonds?
And I love the fact that they have sort of Jada Pinkett as the successor in this story. Jada feels like not necessarily a stereotypical strong female character, but is very much a woman who's flawed, who she mentions that she like went to prison, and this is like sort of her trying to get out of it, is working at this particular hotel, and she feels like a very flawed, interesting character who I really dug the chemistry between her and William Sadler as sort of a mentor-mentee kind of thing, where William Sadler's been carrying around so much weight. You feel that he has, like, the weight on his shoulders, and he's trying to do something good by handing it over to someone who feels worthy, who you might not think would be worthy by the start of the movie, but has a genuine progression. I really love that arc of the movie, and I think it really comes across, especially in how she's tempted, and how she kind of fights off against Billy Zane, and how she's dragged around by Billy Zane at several points, is like in her undies by the end of the movie, but she has so much dominance and power at the same time, but especially that fucking spit take. Just the big climactic moment. I love that, and how she has like a very human, grounded quality that I really loved about her character. And honestly, made me wish we got more Jada Pinkett in general, because she kind of, after this, she hooked up with Will Smith and kind of like disappeared in terms of doing most acting stuff. Like now she's in fucking Madagascar movies.
Yeah, and I think she does that heavy metal band too that I forget the name of, but yeah, she's the vocalist in that.
She's actually really good in this, and I mean, she didn't really go on to do anything of note after this, really, when you think about it. Like, she popped up in the very beginning of Scream 2.
Oh, yep.
And then I can't really...
well, she was recently in Girls Trip and Magic Mike XXL, to be fair. Especially Girls Trip, I thought.
Oh, right. I've never seen it either.
Girls Trip's actually pretty fun, and I think she's a good part of that ensemble. But I think she's appeared in other stuff, like she was in Ali or the Matrix sequels.
Oh, that's true.
Collateral.
She was Niobe. I forgot about that.
Yeah, but I only think just as of recent she started popping up in more things, and I'm all for it because I think she's very talented when she, actually puts herself out there and wants to be. And I think she's just kind of been hiding, behind Will for the most part for like a solid decade and a half or so she was. And now I like seeing her pop up in more stuff. I really dig that whole the scene where she gets tempted by Billy Zane in the hotel room, and it like stretches out and becomes like this sleek, modern, chic kind of thing, where it's clearly her, like she's tempted. Her desire is to like leave the small podunk town, and she ends up getting that wish, and desires immediately that have a lot more responsibility to them. But at the same time, she feels confident enough to be like, you know what, I'm gonna do this. I want to fuck these demons. I'm gonna take them out. That's the thing. I would have wanted to see a whole series of Jada Pinkett being a badass demon hunter.
Or
I would love to see that.
Yeah, definitely. Or even like them passing it every couple movies.
Yes.
To somebody else would have totally worked. Just to piggyback on something you said earlier, I didn't see the Magic Mike films because I lived them.
Great joke. Anyway.
Thanks, we're going to try to get my new hour together.
It's going to be on Netflix, guys. Look for that special.
Yeah. Everything else is.
As we kept mentioning with like the effects work, it's interesting because there was a point where they almost didn't make this with actual demons in it. There was a point where they kind of like wanted to budget things out. The Tales from the Crypt special effects guys were like, oh hey, let me budget this out and here you go with this, like what I'm thinking for the movie that we've pretty much seen here. And then the producers were like, hey, we got a new script, can you budget this? And it was apparently all the demons were like guys in suits who had like flashing eyes and shit. And like the special effects guys were like, we're going to be laughed out of town if we have a movie called Demon Night and there aren't demons in it. But then they obviously like went back and they kind of rebudgeted everything, and for the better, because I agree with what you guys were talking about earlier. The special effects work in this movie is marvelous, with especially the way the demons are designed, and the way especially Billy Zane reacts off of them is incredible. Where they just feel like where they feel like just co-workers to him, or especially when like the little demon things are being born, he just kisses one.
I was just going to say that too.
So gross too.
So and that's another thing too I wanted to say is like the demons in this also reminded me of a lot of what the demons from a lot of like demonic 80s films looked like, because nowadays demons are all like CGI'd and look human, maybe like their eyes go black or something like that, but no, these are like straight up gnarly, gangly, long-limbed, nasty looking teeth. They're gross, and they kind of remind me of Lamberto Bava's demons.
Yes, I can definitely agree with that.
I love that they got like gold earrings and stuff too. It just adds a little bit something else to them.
Yeah. And then they also have a bit of personality, like where one gets shot in the head by Charles Fleischer and just laughs maniacally and stuff like that, where there's an intimidation, but there is also sort of a playfulness that's going on with them at the same time. And even like the conceit of having like the blood sort of act as a force field, I think is genius too. And works so well, where you have to, like, especially when William Sadler's like, oh shit, we have to go all around and make sure that we seal off all these places. And it leads to also, I think this is a perfect example of how to use jump scares. It's not too much, it's not all over the place, and when they're there, they're effective, and more importantly, more scares follow up. It's not just the jump scare and we have nothing to follow it up on.
Right. And another thing, too, like, that also kind of makes this movie stand out, because I don't know if I've really seen this before, but, like, the way you got to take the demons out, you got to shoot them in the eyes. Now, that's fucking difficult.
Right. Yeah, it adds more difficulty, and it also adds to more fun bits, like how Dick Miller ends up dying with, like, putting his head on the antlers, which is great.
Oh, yeah.
His fucking body's still moving around and shit like that. Great stuff. And yeah, it adds more difficulty that gets you kind of engrossed in what's going on here. And I think also there's, along with some of the ahead of its time elements with, like, having, you know, a main protagonist end up being a female black person that wasn't really as common, especially at that time, having stuff like sort of the Thomas Hayden Church, Charles Fleischer, and Brenda Bach character, that triangle feels very much ahead of its time. You've got the sort of typical asshole boyfriend and the Foxy Minx character, but then Charles Fleischer as #nice guy. Pretty much just like, oh, I could treat you so much better, Cordelia. Oh, no, I could. And then, of course, the also kind of dated 90s thing at the same time of him being a postal postman. With when they discover all the guns and shit like that. I think all that stuff, makes this movie feel not necessarily specifically 90s, but sort of timeless in its own weird way.
Yeah, I could see that.
But then again, stuff like Jada Pinkett's hair, very 90s.
Oh, yeah, very.
Oh, my gosh.
Which I love, apparently, she just showed up to set with that hair, and they were like, we didn't know you were going to do that. We'll work with it, I guess. And you even mentioned some of the special effects stuff. I did hear, apparently, what they originally planned for the ending that happens is they were actually going to have Billy Zane's head sort of appear in, like, a big CG fire kind of thing, for especially mid-90s CG. Yeah. And they shot that, and they tested the movie, and they said 98% of the movie tested well, except for that bit, where everyone was like, what the fuck is this? Having, instead, a more physical encounter where there's more of that humor that's going on, the more actual physical interaction with those characters, is so much more satisfying. Because the movie doesn't need a huge special effects moment like that. It only needs a few spurts of it with, like, you mentioned the fire that's coming out of his crotch and shit like that. You don't need something big and extravagant. It's a great character-based horror movie that knows when to let its budget flourish out and when to just let the characters actually interact with each other at the same time.
Even, like, the last scene of him, you get to, like, see him in his, like, full demon form for just a split second, which I thought that was, like, a nice touch, just kind of showing him in his real imposing self before he went out.
But when he fucking melts, though, that's horrifying, too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad that it was only for a second, too, though. Like, it wasn't... Because, let's face it, it looks kind of silly.
Yeah, but, like, that's what I say. Like, for showing it for that split second, that was just all it needed.
Yes, you fell in love with Billy Zane, this dude going around saying silly shit and being genuinely intimidating at points at the same time, this human character, versus when he becomes this big monster. It's only briefly, because you don't need any more than that. Fine. Also, this was the first movie where Billy Zane didn't have a wig. Like, he came to, like, a meeting where he was, after he was casted, and he came with a briefcase full of wigs. He's like, so we could use this one, or this one. He's like, how about you just go bald? And it works perfectly for his character.
This is the first one where he went bald?
Where he had freely admitted to being bald as opposed to wearing a wig.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, he looks way better bald.
Apparently, this was the movie that James Cameron watched and said, I want you as a villain in Titanic.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah, even though arguably that kind of killed his career. Because it's like, oh man, you're in the most famous movie of all time playing a prick who no one wants to really see in big movies.
Right.
Let's go into our final thoughts then, gentlemen, on Demon Knight. Scott, you start.
Yeah, this is just an all-around, just a blast of a film. The one thing we didn't mention is it actually has, like, a really awesome soundtrack, too.
Oh, very 90s soundtrack as well. That definitely dates the movie.
I actually owned the soundtrack before I actually ever seen the movie because of all the bands in it, like Pantera, Cemetery Gates, and Gravediggers with their 1-800-Suicide. Like, I still listen to those songs to this day, and it just makes me smile to hear them in this film.
Nerd alert.
Fuck, dude. You see this shit I post, I'm a total nerd. I'm a nerd and proud of it. I don't give a fuck.
No, I love that the movie started off with that Filter song. That was such a cool way to start it.
we can skip past the filter song. Like I was saying, the demons remind me of the old 80s demons, which I would love to see more of, like, in films nowadays, because I love that, like, more monstrous, like, just otherworldly look. And you just don't get that. And then, yeah, the gore, the characters are all very well portrayed and just a lot of fun. Billy Zane steals the show like I expect him to. But yeah, this is just an all-around blast for me.
Adam.
I pretty much agree with everything Scott said, except that I don't ever really expect Billy Zane to steal the show, but he definitely does in this one. No, I think this is just a fun movie, man. Like I said before, it's a perfect mashup of, 3, 4, 5 different genres, and it just all works. I do agree, though, that it could do probably without the bookends, but, if we didn't have those, probably wouldn't have the movie, period, so...
Yeah, I love this movie. It was probably an introduction to Tales from the Crypt, which, like I said, not probably the best introduction, given it's not quite Tales from the Crypt-y. The only shame in those opening and closing bits is just the fact that it kind of isolates this movie to be an anthology, and it's one of the rare points where I would love if we had more sort of like anthology, especially horror series that were like this, where it's like one movie that's a whole story that doesn't necessarily need more sequels. But Demon Knight builds such a great world on a limited scale that I'm just like, man, I would love to see, even if they started going straight to video, Demon Knight 5 or 6 or whatever the fuck, because there's so much you can do with this concept. It's, like we mentioned, kind of melds a bit of horror, action, fantasy, and Western to a certain extent. We didn't mention that the fact that Billy Zane comes into the movie with a fucking cowboy hat.
Right.
It just immediately illustrates like this is going to blend a lot of genres together. And I think it has kind of gone to the wayside a bit more than some of the other 90s horror movies that do stick out, because, like we mentioned, it kind of has that stigma of being attached to Tales from the Crypt. But it deserves so much more because it's, like we mentioned, it's popular with so many great character actors who you would recognize for stuff that they had done previously or stuff that they would do after. And it has such a great mythology that it builds up with this, and really good scares, makeup, horror moments. It's just, it's so enthralling and fun, and it definitely deserves a lot more credit and kudos than it currently gets. And as we mentioned with Dick Miller, it gave him one of his favorite roles he ever played.
Oh, really?
He has very publicly said that, including the fact that he's just like, oh yeah, the scene at the bar, I had to do so many takes of that.
Yeah.
I just couldn't get the lines right. I just couldn't.
I'm sure he couldn't.
No. And who could, necessarily?
Right.
For sure. But that is the end of our discussion of our Dick Miller double bill on the show. But we have some things we want to do before we get out and before we do our big picking for our next episode. First, we want to read some feedback via the @DEDBpod Facebook page and Twitter page. Every Monday, we ask you guys, hey, what's your favorite and sort of least favorite movies of a topic we're about to do for an upcoming episode? And we asked you all about Dick Miller, obviously, in honor of this episode. And we have a few feedbacks to read about that. Jacob Schott says, I will always think of him in Gremlins. His constant references to WWII stand out in particular, and when the Gremlins smash through his house with a plow. Brian Stitcher of The Horror Returns says, I love that his Murray Futterman character has so much more to do in Gremlins 2. Uncle Willie from Demon Knight, and I just love whenever he pops up in movies like A Cab Driver in Inner Space or The Delivery Guy in Small Soldiers. R.I.P. And then Stephen D. at WaitingFTH says, the flower-eating version of Dick Miller from Little Shop of Horrors was one of my favorites. Which I honestly forgot about that, but yeah, in Little Shop of Horrors, he is just a sort of side character at the beginning of the movie, and he literally starts eating flowers and actually brings out a thing of pepper and starts peppering them, which is great. It's a great bit in there. And then all of those, obviously, we talked about some of those, like Gremlins or Demon Knight, obviously. Can you guys name one other favorite that hasn't been discussed?
Yeah, I would definitely say Buckets of Blood, for one. I love him in that.
A Bucket of Blood is actually, it's really interesting. We kind of talked about it because we almost talked about it for the show. It's a very short movie, and it was sort of his breakout. It's such a weird fucking movie, because it's literally him as a sort of janitor at a coffee shop in the 50s that's covered in bohemians. And in order to impress them, he starts killing people and putting them in wax and cement so that he can make them his art. And they're like, oh, this is a great sculpture. It's a great little bit. It's a very interesting horror satire comedy that is one of a kind. Like, I can't name another movie similar to Bucket of Blood, really.
No, not really.
Yeah, and I mean, pretty much anything you did with Dante, dude. The Burbs, like we've talked about on an episode prior. I mean, how funny is that? Just whole scene, the garbage scene, and then, the Howling and the Gun Store Clerk and Terminator. I mean, the guy's just been in so many things. I mean, to the point to where even when you look up his filmography, you're like, oh my God, he was in that? Holy shit, I didn't realize he was in that. I mean, he was all over the place.
An underrated one for me, I would say, speaking of Dante, is Explorers.
Yeah.
Where
He was in that?
Yeah, he plays this guy who occasionally sees that the kids are trying to build the spaceship. And he was also somebody who was interested in space travel as a kid, but never actually went out there. And honestly, one of my favorite shots in any Joe Dante movie is the bit where he comes across the kids as they're leaving on the spaceship, and he just looks up, and he has a smile on his face that he just sees these kids going up. That moment gives me chills. That's a great, beautiful little moment of this guy who never really thought oh, my dreams are impossible. I was a kid, I was doing silly things, and sees these kids actually manage to do it. It's kind of beautiful, really, that bit.
Wow, I did not realize he was in it. It's been so long since I've seen that movie.
And of course, his Buck in the original Piranha.
Oh God, yeah, Mayor Buck he's so good. Sir, the piranha's reading the guests. So good. Playing a parody of obviously the Jaws mirror in a classic way. So, but yeah, thank you all for that feedback, and of course we want to also thank Chris Oliver for the music used in our show. Listen to more of his music at chrisoliver.bandcamp.com. Thanks to Emily Scarda for the art for our show. She accepts commissions at fiverr.com/EEScarda. And of course, thanks to our guest for the evening, Scott Crawford. Scott, plug yourself. What do you got out there?
All right, thanks, Thomas, for having me back on here. I appreciate it. But yeah, you can find me at the podcast by the cemetery, where it's me and my two buddies. We just finished wrapping our 10th episode up, where we talk 3 different horror films that have black actors playing prominent roles for Black History Month. So we got Sugar Hill from '74, Candyman, and Get Out. And you can find us on the Legion Podcast Network, legionpodcast.com, iTunes. We actually just got ourselves up on Spotify. And you can also find our Facebook page, the Podcast by the Cemetery. It's a group, and it's been fairly active lately, which has been nice because for a while there we just didn't really have much activity, but it seems to be picking up pace. And then, I'll do a quick shout out to the website I write for, too. I write for pophorror.com, and I'm a lead writer for the video game department. So check out some of my articles over there. And they're covering Women in Horror Month right now, and there are amazing articles there.
All right. Glad to hear. And you can also find us on Twitter and Facebook, as I previously mentioned, at DEDBpod. Like I said, we post our little questionnaires about what the topics we're about to do and what your favorites and least favorites are there. And so if you post on there, we'll read on the show. You can also email us with feedback at doubleedgedoublebill@gmail.com, all spelled out. I also have my own individual Twitter account at NotTheWho'sTommy. And I also do writing at marianithomas.wordpress.com. That's where I'll write movie reviews and other stuff like that. And I want to give a shout out to actually the podcast that our past guest Shaquille does, Sequels, because I recommended they do their most recent episode as we're recording, Curse of Chucky, and they gave us a shout out, so a shout out to them. They're over at TalkFilmSociety.com.
Oh, right on.
Nice. Yes.
That's a good show. It's funny.
Yes. And hey, they said with the Curse of Chucky, it's the best movie they've covered on their show yet, so you're welcome.
Right.
And of course, you can find Adam somewhere drinking and just looking up at the sky and saying, God's got a lot to think about tonight.
That's pretty accurate, actually.
It's like Adam, it's not even thundering outside. He's got a lot to think about quietly.
Yeah, it's just me farting.
Indeed. That's what he's doing. But also make sure to subscribe to us on iTunes and Spotify and the Podbean app and YouTube. We're several places.
Stitcher.
And Stitcher, of course, yes. And make sure to rate and review us there, because that gets us more notice on those various platforms. And we're very, very cloying, desperate people who need your attention. But now comes to the end of our show where we do our picks for the next week. So, as I kind of mentioned at the beginning, every show we both come to the table with 2 movies based on a topic that we're only aware of what the topic is. We don't know what each other's picked, and we switch off on good and bad quality. Adam currently has the 2 good movies, and I have the 2 bad movies. For next week's topic, in honor of Captain Marvel's coming out, we are doing an episode on female-led action films.
Yes.
Oh, nice.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, and normally we would each pick a number between 1 and 10, and whichever one gets closest to the numbers we've assigned for each of our movies ends up being the good and the bad feature. When we have a guest like Mr. Crawford here, he gets to take the gun and shoot us between the eyes. But which eye, left or right, is the question. So, Scott, for Adam's 2 good movies, number between 1 and 10.
Gonna shoot for number 9.
All right. At number 10, I have Haywire with Gina Carano by Steven Soderbergh.
Oh, wow.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Yes. And then number 1, I just literally went 1 and 10. I had another one I haven't seen yet, but hey, it's a show based on now. I had Hannah.
I love Hannah.
Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet, man.
Neither have I.
It's really good. Interesting that you picked 2 movies that are done by not traditionally action directors. Because Steven Soderbergh, and then Joe Wright directed Hannah, who's mostly known for bigger Oscar movies like The Darkest Hour recently, amongst other things. Right. But yeah, I dig both those picks. But now, Scott, for my 2 picks I don't dig as much, number between 1 and 10.
All right, let's go with number 3.
Okay. At number 4, I had the big carte blanche movie for a certain director who would keep going on to get work for some reason after this. Zack Snyder's Sucker Punch.
Oh, fuck
no.
me. Oh, God.
You're welcome, Adam.
How boring. Oh, great. All right.
Especially if you watch the director's cut with musical numbers in it.
Oh, I've seen it. Oh, yeah. Oh, great.
But then at number 9, I had one that I think is kind of underrated in terms of what it is. I don't think it's a great movie, but it is Neil Marshall's Doomsday, which I know gets a lot of hate.
I like Doomsday.
Oh, nice.
It's like half of an apocalyptic movie and then half like a medieval movie out of nowhere, but I like it. I think Doomsday's fun.
It's fun for what it is. It's definitely very flawed. I could see why people didn't like it necessarily at the time. And thank you, Scott, for appearing and doing that shooting. Nice shooting, Tex. You podunk, motherfucker!
Thank you very much, Adam. Thanks, Thomas. I'm very happy to be on here with you guys.
And until next time, everybody, if I ever find the little bastards that did this, they're dead meat.
All right.
Yeah, good night.
It is.